Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. And in this video, we're going to go ahead and combine some of the topics that we've talked about recently in some of our React videos, talking about relationship reality. What is the reality of current relationships in modern society, especially in America? And what are the contributing factors? How did it get here? Who's doing what wrong? And what does it look like if we try to improve? What does it look like if we try to develop? What kind of relationships or relationship dynamics can we establish? Bottom line up front is love is tough right now. It is tough right now. I would argue that it is at an all-time low in regards to establishing interpersonal relationships in America. On one side, you got the male loneliness epidemic, where men are falling off by the droves, failing to work on themselves, and also failing to establish relationships simply because the gender that they are seeking, the women on the other side, are more concerned with power instead of competence. That's not to say that that is the only contributing factor, but it is definitely one of them. And on the other side, you have the women interpersonal crisis. And in this crisis, it seems to me that there's two big things going on. One of them is that they're failing to establish relationships with men because they are out there. Women are far more out there and trying to establish these relationships, making these attempts, but they're failing among several dimensions because they never really establish anything on them. They pursue the wrong man. And if that's not the case, they typically give up on it altogether. And then they turn to this bitter, pessimistic route that they can do everything on their own. And that's when they seek a little more power versus competence. That's not to say that that's the only thing that happens. Some of them come to the realization that what they are doing doesn't work. What they were told doesn't work. And now they're starting to realize that in order to play at this interpersonal game, it's going to require some humility. And that's humility on both sides. So I think a good place to start is to understand first and foremost that this is a generational issue. No matter how many times we tried to push towards a solution, or no matter how many times we really try to seek the answer, we need to understand that this is generation upon generation of failure, starting back to the 1950s and 1960s. I'm not really going to get into the politics behind it, but let's just say there are some decisions made around that time that didn't attribute to the successes of interpersonal relationships, leading to more contributing factors to this overall issue. At the end of the day, the biggest issue was people sought power instead of competence, something that you heard me say. And the one thing that you can use to define that kind of struggle is when someone seeks power, they're seeking the entitlement. When someone seeks competence, they're seeking the wisdom. They're seeking to know how they fit into society versus focusing on what they deserve. And that is completely two different factors. And when you walk around thinking about what you deserve, you're never really going to be concerned about what you can put forth in regards to society. Now, that falls into several categories. As you can see, that falls on men and that falls on women. This is why it's a generational issue, because this isn't something that started yesterday. This was in a slow decline. And so in order to adjust this, it needs to be on a slow incline as a fix. One of the contributing factors to this generational issue is fatherlessness. For anyone that is not familiar, fatherlessness is on an all-time rise, and it's something like 60% to 70% of families that don't have a father in the home. Now, for people that think that doesn't matter, I'm gonna tell you, you're wrong. It does matter. And matter of fact, children who have fathers tend to be more successful. They tend to be out of prison more. They tend to have more productive lives. They seem to be making more academic success. Another thing that is seen is children with only fathers come up better than children who have only mothers. Now, that's not a shot to women, but that is just to show that it is a detriment, because women are very valuable in the early stages of a child's life because of the nurturing component, being feminine. However, on the other side, and the entirety of the child's development, the father impacts that more, because he's a part of the cognitions, he's a part of the structure, he's a part of the value. If he is a good man, that's a critical point. Another significant factor in regards to how fathers affect children is you got to understand that The father is typically the representation of what that son should be, that boy growing up. He is always looking and modeling after his father in regards to what a man should be in today's society, how he should conduct himself, and the mannerisms that he should produce through characterological development. And in regards to the daughter's interaction with that father is her first relationship with the opposite sex. That is so important for women because women in turn can establish realms of respect, how to conduct themselves in relationships, as well as how to be treated by men. But that's not to say who matters more. I'm not arguing who matters more. I think both parents are very significant. The thing is that children without fathers are more impressionable. And what that means in today's society is that they're going to conduct themselves in more sheep-like behavior than our predecessors and people from earlier generations. Sheep-like behavior in the society of today is not a good look. It is not. Trust me, there's too much stuff out there that induces power, that induces stupidity, that induces arrogance, and lack of the ability to work on you. Immediate gratifications. There's so many things out here that induce forms of destructive impulse that never allows us to work on the potential of us as human beings. As I said before, this typically started with men as an issue. It typically started with men. And you gotta imagine how impressionable men become bad men. And in this cycle, these impressionable men enacted great misconduct against women for a long period of time since the 1950s and 60s. There was definitely some issues before then, but we're talking about a critical period in which history has started to turn. Men started acting worse. They no longer had to be part of the home because of certain incorporations by the government. They started to have less responsibility, hence becoming less responsible men, becoming more destructive in behavior and wreaking havoc across women on multiple dimensions. Women slowly enacted to the same pursuits, and they started to seek the same amount of power, and they started to establish masculine realms in themselves because they were pursuing men, or the idea of men, that were becoming worse and worse along a certain dimension. That's cause and effect. That's not to say that everything was sunshine and rainbows before this point. By no means. I know that America has a bit of a dark history, but it was a constructive history nonetheless. There was always good and bad in every story. And when we continue to seek power because of our impressionable behavior in current society, now we become focused as a society to die on a hill or seek hills to die on as a way to avoid addressing our own issues. And I think that is one of the critical failures that we have reached on both sides, for men and women. We are constantly seeking drive and purpose outside of ourselves, especially in the academia area where we're going from 15 to about 21 or 15 to 22, what have you. In these areas, we are seeking these political ambitions. We're seeking these worldly causes as a way to avoid the hill we should be focusing on, which is ourselves. We need to establish development along ourselves before we could ever think that we're valuable to the world. And as you can see, that proved to be quite a severe issue. And that's why you see so much movement, so many radical components in schools and in young America for the most part. So naturally, we will start with men. There are a few components here that I've seen to realize on several scales and in several consistencies. One of them is being the failure to develop. Now, men in today's generation, in today's society, especially young men, are being pushed less to seek their purpose in life. Purpose grounded within themselves. They are failing to develop along several dimensions. They lack the discipline. They lack the ambition of personal self. They lack the ability to obtain potential and harness it into a sense of order that they can use along an exponential growing route. There's less activity. There's less interpersonal conduct. There is a lack of confidence. There's constant belittlement on a grand scale by society. Another common term that I've come across is the idea of simping, where men will constantly chase women who are only pursuing power And then they would entertain or try to entertain these relationships by dating far above their own scale while doing nothing with their lives, not realizing that they are displaying their nothingness or nothingness of value to many, many women who are only concerned with power. You have seen simping in regards to a lot of different streaming platforms, a lot of women platforms, OnlyFans, things of that nature, or just casual conduct, not realizing that men are actually disrespecting themselves in a desperate attempt to seek women they probably shouldn't be with. And in that regard, it also dictates the misconduct of men. Men in these conditions are typically being false. They're typically lying to themselves and being shameless in their conduct while conducting this kind of behavior. I don't think that's ever going to be something that's going to help you develop as a man. I think you need to stand your ground and show a little more respect for yourself and work on you so that you can be something a little more desirable. Another phenomenon that I've seemed to catch is the single mother upbringing of men. In other words, I called it upbringing a prince, right? Because that mom didn't have the greatest childhood, she wants to go ahead and bring up her own son in a scale of, I can give you everything you want, everything is yours, the world is yours, the world is your oyster, do what you want with it. Not really realizing that because that mom never was taught accountability, she doesn't know how to teach accountability to a boy, which is one of the critical components that they need to establish within themselves. Otherwise, they're going to fail among several dimensions, not realizing where they're going to belong in society, and fail to pursue any ambitions for themselves because they're going to have an orientation of power instead of competence. They're going to be focused on their entitlement, not the hard work that they need to put in to earn the things that are worthy. And one of the other phenomenons that I've caught is the podcast trap, or at least that is what I've dubbed it. In these podcast traps, or at least in my way of discussing them, is men, especially young men, will listen to several online personalities in a way that they like the message that's being perceived. They like what these people have. And so these people they're telling them how to be a man, how to be with women, and how to get women, and things of that nature, not realizing what it takes to be that kind of person. And so what these podcast traps typically induce is a failure to work on you, thinking that you're already along these points of development. You're already along this point of dimension where you can already start acting like this without putting in the work to become the person necessary to fit in these roles. And it's often a lot of misleading. There's a lot of people that are trying to make money off the degenerate component of men in today's society. I don't really appreciate it. I don't agree with it. I think that everyone needs to work along their own dimension. I think Jordan Peterson said it best. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not to who someone else is today. Stop looking to these people as these answers. You need to find how this stuff is incorporated in you, be humble in regards to where you are, and then move forward. So let's go ahead and dive into the contributions to the problem by women. One of the key components that I have realized is the failure of accountability and the bloated sense of worth of women. Because what failure of accountability does, it allows women to entertain narcissistic tendencies and behaviors, achieving very short-term success and long-term failures among several interpersonal relationships. They think that they are much more valuable, much more adamant than what they are in relationships, not realizing that this is a fantasy. This is a fairy tale. And to be able to be humble and realize where you belong in a relationship or what your true value is requires humility, something I'll get into in a little bit. But when it comes down to women, this is one of the main contributors, mainly because women aren't brought up with accountability. It's not that it was intended. It's just women on average aren't taught accountability as children, because when women are little and they're the little girls tend to be able to get away with more evil. They get to get away with more misconduct simply because they're girls, and a nurturing tendency is more often provided to girls. With that being said, that's a bit of father misconduct or even parenting misconduct in general. But it doesn't change the fact that this is the outcome. Because with this bloated sense of worth, there's not a realistic grade of self. And matter of fact, they will grade themselves, or women will talk to other women and women will grade each other, not realizing that that's not how the men grade you. That's not how the market dictates your value. And the one thing that women will constantly elude themselves is that they have a say in how the market dictates your value, when that's not how it works at all. And you got to be humble. And the more you work on you, your value can increase. That's a great thing about women. Just like men. Men's value can increase if they work on themselves. Women can increase if they work on themselves and they become more feminine, right? They entertain less relationships. They have to do things along their own scale to increase their value, just like men have to increase their own value in their own way. And that's where these genders are very, very different. And it's very specific that they increase along these dimensions versus crossing over and increasing into each other's dimensions. That doesn't really increase their value. If a man becomes more feminine, he's not increasing his value. If a woman becomes more masculine, that's not increasing her value. And I think that's one of the components that people seem to misconstrue. I said it recently in one of my videos that women who adopt the masculine features of their failed relationships tend to be less value along a farther dimension. This is even more prominent and true in this video. Another thing that this leads to, it's kind of like a follow-on effect, is women start dating up. What do? They pursue relationships that they can't actually sustain in long term because they pursue men that are out of their league, and these men will entertain these lower graded women for the sake of what? Primal instinct, primal entertainment. That is how men work, because men pursue sex as women pursue attention. That is the biology, and that is how it is. But that doesn't change the fact that they still entertain, because these are the men that they want because of their bloated value. But if they were a little more humble, they would have realized how much better this other man is, because that man that wasn't a 9 or wasn't a 10, guess what? That man that was a 7 still had his act together, and he was still willing to be faithful and committed to you. And because you're a 5 with a bloated value of 10, you're gonna think that you're beyond him, right? That you have the right to belittle others, when really you don't, because you never worked on you. And that's a constant issue with women, because they were never taught accountability. That is not entirely their fault. I think that falls on parents a little bit in regards to how children are raised. I think accountability needs to be taught to both the boy and the girl, just in different dimensions. One of the last things that I've noticed as well is that women often seek likeness and not difference in their partner, not realizing that they need to seek differences in their partner, because this is what's going to complete them along further dimensions. How the hell are you going to know more honest things about yourself if you seek someone who is as deceptive as you are, someone who is agreeable as you are? Not to say that deception is in lieu of agreeance. It's just that agreeable people do not seek conflict or want conflict for any matter. And so agreeableness tends to foster more deception than honesty. And so when it comes down to learning things about yourself, how is the agreeable woman, which is typically a feminine nature unless they establish masculine qualities, how is that person going to learn more about themselves? How is someone who is less decisive going to learn how to make better decisions and orientations to themselves? This is where the differences come into play. And men can take a lot from the woman's conduct as well, not in the sense that they should start acting more feminine, but the way in which a woman conducts herself in a more peaceful and calm manner, right, in a more passive manner at times, can be fortuitous to the man as well. That not everything needs to be tackled aggressively. Not everything needs to be tackled in demand. Not everything needs to be commanded. Not everything needs to be intense. And that's fine too, because women have learned to conduct themselves in more passive manners, because they are not as physically provoking as men typically are. And that's where the differences are very significant, and likeness is less significant. Because if women sought out people or men that are just like them, it's not a good relationship. And often the woman is going to be less likely to want to continue that relationship because of being less fulfilled in that kind of relationship. Because the honest question that women need to orient towards themselves is, ladies, if you had a partner that was just like you, could you put up with you on a daily basis? And that's an honest question that needs to be put forth, because it's typically a more decisive man that's going to be able to handle that kind of woman. I mean, it's not to say that it's only an issue of women. I mean, It's just that men aren't pursuing masculine women either. I mean, because a man doesn't want to be with another man. It's kind of the same concept. They're going to seek a difference and not a likeness. And that's why this is mainly an issue with women, because they rather choose something that is more comfortable and familiar than have the courage or bravery to seek the unknown. With the contributions to the problem in mind and how they're significant, as well as how to navigate them a little bit, we're going to get into the cohesive potential of men and women in these relationships. Men's ability to be masculine, or at least having the biological tendency to be more masculine, brings a lot of elements to a relationship that are very significant, such as direction, structure, and ambition towards his own goals. A man's value is dictated by what he's pursuing and how much he is pursuing it. People that stay idle and stay stagnant and do not pursue along that dimension and lose their purpose are never going to be grounded enough to face the misery of life. It is not going to work out that way. And men need to consider their value in the way that they can structure their own life by being humble and being able to have discipline in regards to their humble view of self, so that way they can know how to travel along that dimension and start seeking these things, developing structure for their lives, because life is less forgiving for men considering today's society and how hard society is on men and how much we think they can take it. This is their reality. And in that mud, a man has to dictate his value, not dictate in a sense of bloated worth, but establish it through action and through credibility and through consistencies. And through that hard work, is he prepared to be a father? Is he prepared to be a husband? Is he prepared to be a significant other to women who are more impressionable naturally? Women contribute in a sense that they are far more nurturing. They are the passive energy into a man's life or into anyone's life in general. They are a contributing factor to the homely environment and foundation of what could be a man's life. One of the common things that I speak on is how when children are young, they use their parents as their safety net and strong supporting foundation of trust and love to go out and explore their human condition. So when a baby is around a parent and they're at the park, they're always looking at the parent to make sure the parent is still there as they conduct and explore and take risks around this safety net, because that's how they know they can navigate life. They know that they're safe, and as long as they can see their foundation of trust and love, then they are more willing to explore the unknown and the things that may be scary to some. And that's what women and men can establish in a foundation of relationship. And women can bring that nurturing positivity and trust and confidence to a foundation of relationship where men can stand on to be even more effective. Now, men were effective before. That's why they're able to retain their value. But now with this new laid out foundation, they can be even more so because they have that basis to retreat to. Women can also be seen as a force multiplier. That's why when women are around other women, now naturally they kind of bloat themselves up in a sense, but it can also be applied to a relationship as a way to foster the ability to go further, just like I said in a previous statement about having a foundational relationship. And at the end of the day, nothing can be more attractively feminine than a woman can. And a woman that applies her femininity in relationships can be more submissive, can be more active, more nurturing in the harsh man's life. Now, that man is obviously going to take her in a positive direction, but the woman needs to understand that she is a force multiplier to that man's life. And if they establish a sense of trust and love, they can operate on that foundation in which I previously spoke on. One of the things that I spoke on recently was the unbelievable concept that women need to find a man to follow and pursue. But the one thing I'm going to say there is I understand the unrealistic concept that I'm going to follow and obey a bad man. I think that's where the key component comes into play, and that's why men need to work on themselves, so that way there are less bad men in society and more holistic relationships can be established and built. And that's the same side with women. If women can transcend their constant need for power and entitlement, they'll be able to address themselves along that same developmental dimension in their own route, in their own way. And should men and women pursue their own cohesive potential, there's a few dynamics in play that men and women could try in these interpersonal relationships if they care to consider it and they care to accept that challenge of a relationship. A couple of the dynamics that I've realized and that have been effective over long periods of time are the team dynamic and the leader dynamic. So with team dynamic, it is when two people collide with intense personalities and they establish not necessarily who's more important, but they establish a third personality in the relationship that is the relationship itself. So essentially, two people come as one, but that one thing is neither both person, and in turn it's actually the relationship personality, in the sense that this is the third person in this two-person cohesiveness that is became the agreement and consistency for this relationship. It basically how they've established how things work in their relationship, because maybe, the man is less of a leader or the woman is more of a leader. And obviously there's some detriments there to that as well. But that's not to say that this team dynamic has seen successes, especially in current society, because men are less masculine and women are less feminine on a grander scale. We are not at where we used to be. And that's why it's becoming more and more prominent, because when the man cares about something, he's going to let the woman know. And when the woman cares about something, he's going to let the man know. And there's no one that's ever in constant lead of the considerations. And in fact, it becomes that third personality that by understanding each other, we know that he likes this and she likes this. So anytime these things are there, they will be in consideration of each other. The reason why this becomes an issue, though, is, and just to speak on, I will speak on the negatives of both, is what happens when the considerations clash. Who wins and who becomes the loser? Because that always happens too. That's why the team dynamic has a little more friction than the next dynamic. And in the team dynamic, what happens is, if one consideration is considered more important based off selfishness, obviously, there's always going to be a little bit of resentment for the loser. So if there's something that is happening on the same day for a man and a woman, and the man says, well, this is my passion. And the woman says, well, you also know this is my passion. And they've never established the leadership realm. Whoever loses in that component will start to develop a little disinterest or a little resentment based on those constant frictions being made throughout the relationship. Now, that is one of the more common things that happens in a team-based dynamic, but it doesn't change the fact that it happens frequently, or at least this is the common approach that requires the least amount of development in regards to two people coming together as one. The next dynamic is the leader dynamic, in which case there's only one side of this that remains in positive regard, because if the woman is the leader in the relationship, it will lead off to something that is unfulfilling for the woman. Yeah, maybe it sounds good at first to be the boss, but then you need to understand that a woman seeking to be a leader is a woman seeking power and not competence. And so if she is seeking to be the leader in the relationship, you got to imagine that the amount of disrespect she may feel towards her partner, or the lack thereof for her partner. But in the other side of it, where the man is a leader, which is typically in agreement and is typically the masculine feature, the way that this dynamic works is if it is a good man amongst several different measures. Good is obviously very subjective in today's society, but good in the sense that he established multiple realms of dimension in himself. He developed along several components in his life. He knows how to be considerate. He knows and has been attentive to the woman that he's with, and knows what she cares for, and knows how to prioritize those components in their nature, and knows how to plan around it. So he is the constant decision maker, and the woman doesn't need to constantly come up with several different issues or considerations, because he's already aware, and he's going to make the best decision for them as a whole, instead of just selfishly pursuing his own interests all the time just because he's the leader. What a good leader or an effective leader is someone who takes everyone's considerations into play and thinks about the universal arcing goal. That means that in any given environment, there is an unconditional setting that the best decision for both partners will always be made. The reason why the leader dynamic actually takes more work than the team dynamic is because, one, the man, in order to achieve the ability to be that kind of person, he has to truly work on himself as a whole. to be that considerate, to be that decisive, and to be that consistent. That takes a lot of hard work. That takes a lot of discipline. That takes a lot of leaps and bounds amongst his own journey. And in regards to the woman, the reason why that's such a developmental route for the woman is because she needs to alleviate what her power is and have trust and confidence in the man that she is pursuing. That means that she needs to drop off all the relationships that she used to entertain, and that she needs to cast away her pursuit of power, that she needs to become more accountable, be more humble, less bloated in her self-worth, and be more submissive and become more feminine. Because as we learned today's society, women are less feminine because they are becoming more masculine because of the fall off of men. And as you see, this in its leadership dynamic takes far more work than two people just meeting in the middle doing half and half, which is obviously more convenient in the team dynamic. But it doesn't change the fact that both of them are effective. The reason why the leader dynamic has its negatives is because what if that man isn't a good man? What if that man is living on a sense of entitlement? What if he's making all these decisions simply because he's arrogant enough to do so? This isn't going to bode well for the woman. The woman is going to try to play her part, but obviously this man isn't ideal. And it's the same concept on the other side. What if a woman never really submits? What if she still is seeking power? What if she still has the desire to be masculine? What if she fails? What if they both fail to travel along the developmental route to achieve this kind of dynamic of a relationship? It doesn't bode well for either. As a matter of fact, they'll both fail miserably. And so on one side of the team dynamic, you have an easier cohesive route, but with higher fall off on the back end, versus the leader dynamic, where it is harder to obtain initially, but a stronger outcome on the end, simply because men are better in decisive positions. And if they achieve along that dimension and become desirable men or admirable men, and the women become feminine women, then it is a great component and a great dynamic to a lot of relationships. At the end of the day, all we can do is put our best foot forward in regards to establishing relationships with whoever we decide to be our partner in life. And I think that we are getting away from the importance of it. We need to understand that being able to establish relationships is a simple human component of people in general. Isolating ourselves is just being a way to reject our potential in doing so. That's not strengthening us. As a matter of fact, that's weakening us. And we need to put ourselves back out there. We need to establish ourselves in realms of confidence and realms of strengths that we can provide as the people in these relationships for the better. Obviously, there's going to be variables that are unique. There's going to be variables that go against some of the stuff that was said in this video. And I understand that too. That's not to say that this is the end all be all. That's not what I'm saying. I see an issue. This is what I see about it. And this is what I think can be done about it. Now, obviously, I'm going to speak from worldly experience. I'm going to speak from my own previous successes in the way that I've seen things work in the world, as well as research that proves some of the stuff that I've been saying. If you disagree with it, that's okay. You can go ahead and live your life in whatever way you see fit. I just am trying to address something that is growing concern on multiple sides. With that being said, now begins the Q&A piece, because all of my personal videos have a Q&A. And you heard this word used several times, but never really defined in its entirety. What is humility, or what does it mean to be humble? One of the extremes I have used to define humility is this: being able to admit the worst of you to your worst enemy in the worst conditions. Now, for the people that don't understand what that means that you need to be able to be honest about your own negatives and your own downsides, your detriments to people you don't even like in a situation that is unpleasant for you. Does that mean that, oh, I have to be able to do that in order to consider myself humble? No, but the ability to do so will dictate how humble you actually are. And for the people that can think about that process and think about what that would look like to them, and be like, man, that would be hard. You know, maybe you have that person in your life now where you really don't like, and you hate talking to them in general. But imagine being able to admit to that person your own flaws is power. At the end of the day, self-awareness is a huge component to our ability to be humble. We need to know where we are. We need to admit the things that we neglect. We need to know what position we actually stand on, so that way we can actually move forward, because that's the only strategic position to stand on, is to know that you aren't great and you're not at that level you want to be yet. And there are these things that are your fault, and you can't keep pointing your finger to the world. The reason why humility is so important in relationships is because we never establish a sense of accountability for ourselves to know where we are. Instead, we just demand what we think we deserve, and then we go out and get it and wonder why there's this aggressive pushback in this regard. All because we didn't actually look ourselves in an honest mirror and in an honest light to say, you know what? Damn, we got a lot of problems. We have a lot of issues. There's some things here that I haven't touched in years. There's some things that I've been running from. There's some, damn, I'm a coward. And then that's not to say that's where you end. That is where you begin. You got to begin somewhere. And that is the powerful component about it, is by being humble, it's not telling ourselves that we are nothing. No, that's being destructive. But it's to say that here we are, and we are this bad person. And now that we've admitted this, we can forgive ourselves because we've accepted that we are these bad people. And now guess where we can go? Because now we're honest with ourselves. Now we're not jumping the gun. We're not taking leaps like how men do with those podcast traps. No, we know that we are nowhere near that dimension to measure it. We need to address ourselves to ourselves and then move along that dimension. And that's why being humble is so important. If you're being cocky and arrogant and being entitled, trust me, you're not humble. At no regard are you. And the only way that you can reach that level of success, especially in relationships and even in life in general, is by being humble, because being humble requires honesty of self. And if we can be honest with ourselves, we can definitely be honest about what we want, what we prefer, what we require, what we're seeking, and with each other. And I think that's probably one of the most important factors about it. So thank you for everyone that watched this video so far. A little bit longer of a video. Please comment, like, and subscribe. And if you dislike the video, then dislike it, and you'll never see me again. But also hit the comment section below for any follow-on perspectives, any additional comments, maybe some things you disagree with. I don't really care. I believe that anyone that comes humbly can receive something respectfully, and that's just the environment that I try to pitch, even on something that is controversial. It doesn't really matter. That's just how I try to put my business forward. We as a whole got a lot to work on. Love is important. Relationships are important. And I think we as a society should do our best to try to fix these issues that we have amongst ourselves. That's all I got to say for today. Thanks again, and I'll go ahead and see you next time.